These 11 states declined in population over the last 5 years. Number 4, I found shocking. I was absolutely incredibly surprised by this. So let's go to this. This is from the Census Bureau. They just, a couple weeks ago, they came up with this estimate for 2020 population. And we're not done yet, but this is their most recent estimate, which I thought was pretty interesting. This isn't the census data, what they call that, decennial, or I can't remember, that you filled out here not too long ago. But this is the census data, and I can't remember if this includes illegal immigrants or not. I don't remember. I just can't remember. But anyway, it's very interesting. So it goes back to 10 years. April 1st, 2010 to July 1st, 2020. That's more than 10 years. And they got in regions. So we got the U.S. as a whole, the Northeast, the Midwest, the South, the West, and then it has all these individual states. So I want to show you something. So the U.S. as a whole increased our population over the last 10 years by 6.71%. We now have about 329.5 million people. Where to start the decade, we have 309. So we increased our population by about 20 million people in the U.S. as a whole. But look at this. The Northeast only grew by 0.961% in the last 10 years. That's it. At the end of 2020, they had 55.8 million. At the beginning of 2010, or towards the beginning of 2010, they had 55.3. Only grew by 500,000 people or so. Let me get over here, actually. It's very interesting. So let's keep looking. Now, what you're going to see here is here's the Midwest grew by 2% over the last 10 years. But look at the South. It grew by 10%, man. 10.5% over the last 10 years. The South has more than twice the amount of population as the Northeast, and yet the Northeast, from that D.C. to Boston corridor, has all the entertainment, the political, the banking. I mean, just the Northeast has so much more power than relative to the population size. So the South grew from 100 is now at 126 million, whereas the start of the decade is at 114. 12 million people came down south. Crazy, man. The West grew by 9.32%. I mean, now the West is the second largest in population size. The Northeast is the least. It's crazy. But check this out. Over the last 5 years, the Northeast has actually lost people. It was at 55.8 now. In 2016, it was at 56.063. So in the last 5 years, the Northeast has lost people. The Midwest has only grown by 0.439. And the South has only grown by 2%, and the South has grown by 3.4%, and the West has grown by 2%. So what you're going to see here, in the last 5 years, the U.S. as a whole only grew by less than 2%. Interesting, huh? So in the last 5 years, we had 323 million people in the U.S. Now we got 329 million. We only grew by 6 million people. Now, that, again, goes back to my whole thing on deflation right there, the Japanese model that we're going into. That's interesting. So we are decelerating our rate of growth for sure. Over the last 3 years, the U.S. has only grown by 0.8%, and the last year only grew by 0.32%. In the last year, both the Northeast and the Midwest lost population in the last year. So you can see a decelerating trend. The West grew by 0.45 and the South grew by 0.77. So we're seeing a significant deceleration. It's very interesting to me, actually. But both the Midwest and Northeast have lost people the last year. The Northeast lost people over 3 years. The Northeast lost people over 5, and they only gained 0.961 over the last 10 because the only time they actually grew was in the first 5 years of this decade. So if anything, the liberals should have loved Trump because, they're always worried about population. We've got too many people as they sit there and consume private jets and whatnot. It's nuts. But anyway, so let's look at the states that have lost people over the last, we have 11 states that have lost people over the last 5 years. Let me get my notes. Alaska lost 1.53% of the population, which is weird because they only had 742,000 people to start with, but now they have 11,000 less, which is pretty interesting. But Alaska's kind of out there. It's cold, dark, the whole thing, inexpensive. So let's go down. Number 1 was West Virginia. West Virginia lost 2.6% of its population over the last 5 years. So what they used to have was 2016 is right here. So West Virginia used to have 1.8 million. Now they got 1.7 million. So they lost more by far than any other people. Number 2 is Illinois, and that shouldn't really shock anybody. I mean, Illinois is just a basket case. They lost 1.8% of its population. They used to have 12.8 million. Now they got 12.5 million. So they lost, roughly 300,000 people. That's number 2. Number 3 was, we talked about Alaska's number 3. Number 4, though, was crazy. Is Hawaii. Hawaii, look at that. Lost 1.5% of its population. They used to have 1.28 million. Now they got 1.40 million. And they lost over 5, 3, and 1 year. So, I mean, that's not just 1 year that everyone left Hawaii. I thought that was interesting. That's Hawaii right there. Lost over 1.5% of its population. Number 6 was Mississippi, which also kind of surprised me, given that the South has grown so much. Lost 0.796 of its population over those 5 years. Number 7 is Louisiana. Again, another southern state, lost 0.77% of its population over those 5 years. Number 8 was Connecticut, northeastern state, lost 0.63% of its population over the last 5 years. Number 9 was Vermont, again, another northeastern state, lost 0.163% of its population. So they had 625 million. Now they got 625,000. Now they got 623,000. So not much. It just shows you how small those states are. And then lastly, Rhode Island. Not lastly, but Rhode Island, again, a northeastern state, has lost 0.065. So just basically keeping even Steven there. They went from 1.057 million to 1.057 million. They lost about a couple hundred people. And then Pennsylvania, yep, PA lost some people too, not much, but let's see. Pennsylvania is number 11 of states that lost right there. They lost 0.041% of its population. They had 12.788, now they got 12.783. So that's pretty interesting. But check out after 1 year, the last 1 year, this is nuts. New York in 1 year lost, right? Number 1, losing in 1 year, 0.649%. And in 3 years, 1.06%. Look at that. New York has lost 1% of its population in the last 3 years. They used to have 19.63 million. Now they got 19.336 million. No, they used to have 19.657. Now they got 19. I mean, they lost 300,000 people, man. Crazy. Did I say? Yeah, they're number 5, by the way. But just in 1 year alone, they lost over 100,000 people. Nuts. Over the last year, West Virginia lost quite a sizable amount of its people last year, 0.584%. So again, I mean, just, nuts. Number 2 was Hawaii again. Number 2, they lost from 1.4. They lost 8,000 people, and they've been a sinking ship for the last 5 years. Nuts. Let's see. Massachusetts is in here as well. The last year, Massachusetts lost, less than a fraction of 1%, but still they lost 1,000 people in Massachusetts. Mississippi is number 8. Michigan's number 8. Michigan lost 0.183%. So again, they went from 9.87 million to 9.96 million. New Jersey lost people. California lost people over the last year. California lost 0.176, which is much bigger when a total population size because it's so huge. But look at that. They had 39.437 million. Now they got 39.368 million. That's 100,000 people right there. And that's just at the end of July, by the way. I just find that incredibly interesting. Anything else jump out at me there? No. I just think it's nuts. So we'll do another video on the last 10 years. I tell you. So the U.S. has only grown by in the last 5 years literally from 2016 we had 323 million, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Now we're owned by 6 million people. The Northeast fell by 200,000 million people. It's crazy. So I don't, what do you make of that? Is a real estate opportunity in these states that are shrinking? So the last 10 years, we only have 6 states that lost population. But I mean, nothing. There's no state that lost population over the first 10 years of the first 5 years of this last decade. No state, even West Virginia, grew by 0.522% over the first 5 years of this decade. Isn't that nuts? Vermont even grew. I was surprised to see Maine on this list because I do expect Maine to be in the negative category by the time the end of this year rolls around, but we shall see. I wonder if there's any real estate opportunity there. Anyway, we shall see. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you seeing anything out there? A decelerating growth. Now look at this. The ones that are just growing crazy over 10 years, right there. Arizona, 16%. DC, DC just because of growth of the government. Florida, 15%. Georgia, 10%. Idaho, 16%. Nevada, 16%. North Carolina and North Dakota, 11 and 13%. Oregon, 10%. Oklahoma, 6%. South Carolina, 12.8%. South Dakota, 9.6%. Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Washington State. Just people are leaving the holes and they're moving to better pastures, that's for sure. Anyway, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Thanks now.